Okay. There we go. All right, so this is a session on documenting community engaged scholarship for promotion and tenure and also external review. It's a really helpful overview for those who are thinking about this as graduate students and know that they want to go into a line of work where they're going to need to talk about their community engaged scholarship to others who may be familiar with research and other forms of scholarship, but might not quite understand what community engaged scholarship is. And also if we're talking to other people in other departments, because oftentimes our department may be very familiar with and comfortable with this work, but then when we're talking to others or we're writing for others who are in our larger school or college or university, it can be really helpful to have this sense. So again, I'm Emily Janke. I direct the Institute for Community and Economic Engagement. I have gone through promotion and tenure, both at the associate or up to the associate level. And then also this year went through for promotion to full. So I've got experience in both of those. And I've served on the HHS, the Health and Human Sciences committee for 5 years. And so have been able to see and steward this process that way as well for the number of years. So, some of the lessons that I want to share are things that we've learned. UNCG has approved community engagement as a form of scholarship in our promotion tenure guidelines. And that change happened in 2010. And so it's been 13 years since we have formally recognized it as a form of teaching, research, and scholarship. So if you look at the university policy, you will see community engaged scholarship embedded throughout. And so even though we have done all the policy work, as you know, a lot of this work is also cultural. So thinking about how do we interpret the policy? How do we help others interpret the policy? And so promotion and tenure is always about having to raise awareness, educate others, and define what success looks like. And I would argue that this isn't unique to community engaged scholarship, because there's certainly been folks who, when you're writing your dossier, if you're a qualitative researcher or a critical scholar, there are folks who don't know exactly what that is because they're doing a lot of maybe quantitative scholarship, more positivist approaches. And so being able to raise awareness, educate others, and defining what success looks like is just generally good practice, but especially important for community engaged scholarship, often because what it looks like can be a little bit different, just like that was true with qualitative research at one point. The other lesson we've certainly learned is that output metrics alone will not do the job equitably, fairly, or accurately in being able to describe what success looks like. So when we think about output metrics, oftentimes in promotion and tenure, in reviews, we need to talk about how many students were taught, how many papers were written, how many conference presentations were done, what were the venues. So it's really about what did you produce? What are those artifacts? And so we know for all forms of scholarship, but also especially community engaged scholarship, that we also need to be talking about process and relationships as other dimensions of success, that we can't get the results. We can't be successful if we have, if we don't share also our process and the relationships through which this work happens. And so ultimately, you need to tell your story. So there are a few areas where scholarship gets framed. And so I use the word scholarship in quotes because scholarship is a word that is used in lots of different ways by folks. In the university policy for UNCG, we do have a definition of scholarship, and it talks about that scholarship is not synonymous with research, but it also includes teaching, creative activity, and service. And so when we think about scholarship, it's really broadly defined as the integrated work that we do as faculty members. And so there are many different things that we do as scholars that produce scholarship. And so as you're thinking about where do I need to define myself and start to tell my story, or start to pay attention to how people are talking about me or framing my scholarship? There are a number of areas. And so here's just a few of them. So of course, external reviews. So when your department chair sends out a request for someone to do the reviews, that is a moment where the department chair has an opportunity to frame what it is that they're asking that person. What are the standards at UNCG, and how is community engagement a part of that? So as you're talking to your department chair about the folks that you would like to have serve as reviewers, because at UNCG we're as candidates able to propose some of the people that we would like to be our reviewers, our external reviewers. It's also a time to have a conversation with your department chair about how will they understand your community engaged scholarship as an aspect that is accepted at UNCG, especially if they're at an institution where this isn't a normative kind of role or form of scholarship. The second one is the department context statement. So in the when your department chair writes or includes the context statement, it's talking about what does scholarship look like in your department. So this often is helping people in other departments in your school or college understand what's the special flavor in the Educational Leadership and Cultural Foundations department, for example. What does scholarship look like? What are the general norms around this? And so that's an important space where community engagement, if it's described as part of that context statement, can be really helpful in terms of other folks understanding what this is. And so that is something that is often, I would ask to see what that looks like, or to talk to my department chair about that. The department chair will also include then a specific context statement about you. And so it is often saying, this person came at this time, they came in as this type of scholar. If they came in with any years, for example, because they came from another position where they had kind of credit towards tenure, or they were able to bring in certain things. This is a kind of a bespoke conversation of the chair about you, about what it is that you came in to do, why they hired you. And if there's anything unique or special in terms of directed professional activity, for example. And then, of course, the one that people usually think about scholarship and how they're framing it for promotion and tenure is with regards to the teaching evaluation, or sorry, the faculty narratives and the kind of data or information that you share. In your faculty narrative, there is, of course, there's generally a statement broadly, and then there are different kind of buckets: teaching, research, or creative activity. And then the final one is service. Some folks will also have a directed professional activity bucket as well. And so that is the place that you have the most influence and where you are most able to talk about who you are. And so in a few slides, I'll share a little bit about some strategies for developing your faculty narrative. Teaching evaluations, of course, is another place where folks, so this is teaching evaluations, not only from, I guess your students could be one space, and if you have some of the qualitative open-ended evaluations, but also your peer evaluation. So when you talk to folks and they review your course and they write a letter that gets included in your annual report or in your promotion and tenure files, this is a space for you to have a conversation with them before they come to review your course and tell them, this is what I'm trying to do. I'd like for you to understand that. And so that might also be a part of what they're evaluating. And so I know some of the, I often talk to faculty who I am reviewing their courses for and ask them, can you show me your syllabus, but also what are some things that you're really working on that I should know about and pay attention to. Another area is the faculty CV. And of course, that is where you share the positions you've had, the presentations, the journal articles, but also all the other scholarly artifacts that you may have developed, whether they're white papers, podcasts, exhibits, whether you've consulted or had presentations that are related to your scholarship. And so this is an area that is also about what sections does this go in. So really thinking through when you're creating podcasts, white papers, preprints, those kinds of things, data sets that you've put out there, open scholarship, thinking about how that fits into and is described in some of those sections. And we don't cover that in this presentation, though that probably would be a good one to talk about. And I could certainly talk about it with you individually if you're interested, because a CV is often a place where people are trying to figure out, how do I put these artifacts so that they are recognized as scholarship, but also people are very clear on whether it's been peer reviewed or what the format is and what success looks like. A final area where scholarship gets framed is in the dossier, there's an area, or in the platform, there's an area for supporting and additional materials. This might be letters that you get from community partners or professionals who are using the work that you have developed, that they can say, you know what, we use this all the time in our program, or this work is cited all the time when we're doing professional development for our teachers, or whatever it might be. And so that's an area to put some of those materials as needed and to reference them in your faculty narrative. If you just have materials in there that are not referenced in your narrative, likely the reviewers may not see it or open it, because there are so many documents sometimes that people put in there that it just gets really lost. And then finally, if you've been here over the last few years, the provost had accepted or had offered that some people could delay their tenure a year if they wanted to. However, regardless of whether you chose to delay it or not, COVID did and does continue to affect us and the work that we do. And so I had worked with some colleagues a couple of years ago in developing a COVID context statement, and that is something that is still available to you to include. You don't have to, but you can talk about the ways in which COVID has affected both negatively and positively. And so again, that's not in this presentation, but there is some documentation in a work sheet, that like a rubric that you can work through. And again, I can talk with you if that's of interest. That way. So community engaged scholarship defined. So folks use the term community engaged scholarship in lots of different ways. At UNCG, we do have definitions that we have agreed to as a campus, and it is on the communityengagement.uncg.edu website under resources, and its definitions is the tab. So community engaged scholarship in a nutshell is an approach, it's a methodology, it's how we do and how we know certain things. So they are partnerships with people outside of the university, typically, though it can include student populations in our university. They are asset-based in the sense that we are looking at our community members, the populations that we're working with, as folks who have lots of lived experience, have lots of resources and skills, and we're looking to understand how we can walk alongside them to do this work with them. And so in this way, it's very different and from applied research or translational research that is often about how do we give something to the community? How do we give this resource to them? How do we do this for them? And so the sense is that if you hear the prepositions, it's often not with, but it's to or for or on a community, which can be appropriate in certain methodologies. It's just not a community engaged scholarship approach. There's also two other characteristics of community engagement. One is that the partnerships are reciprocal, and by reciprocal, we mean that the community members are involved as thought partners and co-laborers in the work. And so they are involved in helping us set up the ideas. They're helping us implement the project, identify how we want to implement the project, how long the project is going to go, how we're going to disseminate it, what would be mutually what would be helpful and what would be mutually beneficial. So mutually beneficial is really about win-win. Are the folks who are all involved really clear about how this is going to serve their mission? Whether it's you as a faculty member and you're doing scholarship, or this is a teaching strategy for you and your students, it's really clear that that's going to help you and your mission to do that work. How is it also clearly helpful for the community partners? And so those are the three real critical elements of the types of partnerships that we're talking about. And there are a number of documents that are here, and there's a reference list at the end of the slides where you can go find some of them, but they help you think about and you find some language, because that's one of the challenges folks often have is, how do I describe this work that I'm doing? So community engagement is, of course, scholarly work. And my PhD is in higher education. I've studied faculty community engagement for a long time. And one of the things that is helpful for folks to know is sort of like, what is scholarship? Because we often get our PhDs in our disciplinary areas, but we don't have a strong sense of what scholarship actually is. So all scholarly work, whether it's in computer science, whether it's in cultural foundations, whether it's in peace and conflict studies, is focused on focused on having clear goals. You know what you're doing, you have an agenda, you can talk about what that is. Even if it's broadly defined, even if it is something that is iterative, you have a sense of what it is that you're working towards. It's probably what you wrote about in your job application. Scholarly work also relies on preparation and mastery of existing knowledge. It is building on other things that have come around. It is positioned or situating this work within a tradition of other scholarship or ways of knowing. It also is using appropriate methods. So one can say, if this is my goal, I have to use these kinds of methods to get to that goal. And that's actually really important, not only for all research, but especially for community engaged scholars, to talk about, if I didn't have these reciprocal asset-based mutually beneficial partnerships, then I wouldn't be able to get to the goals that I have. And we'll talk again more about creating that narrative. All quality scholarly work has some sort of significance of results. And by significance, I could also say meaningful results. It's not that they're statistically significant, it's that it's meaningful and that you're finding something that is the so what. Even with null hypotheses, that can sometimes be very meaningful because it's showing us where we can stop spending our energy and how we can move in different directions. Scholarly work also has effective dissemination and communication. So it's not only that it happened, but also that others were able to look at it, they're able to build upon it, they're able to critique it. And so, but this is another piece that folks often talk about with community engaged scholarship, is that it is disseminated, that we're not just doing the service, but there's something that came from that we can share with others in the field or others with the community, so that we can continue to learn from that experience and build on that, and maybe even widen the practice among others. And then, of course, there's consistently ethical conduct. In community engaged scholarship, there are two audiences that at least two audiences that we're speaking to. So this is often the challenge for our folks. Hold on a second, I wanted to change. Okay. This is often one of the challenges for our folks, is that we are so accustomed to having an academic impact. Meaning, have you published in the right journals? Have you gotten to the right conferences? Have you been asked to speak by eminent scholars to show your eminence, right? That connection. And so we're really used to those kinds of measures and impacts. And there have been very well-worn grooves in how we measure that and what people are expecting. However, if we're doing community engagement, there's a second trajectory. There's also the community impact. Because remember when we talked about high indicators of quality scholarship, and we talked about impact, we're also talking about ethical impact of communities. And so your work may, in any one project that you're doing with, in, for, by community, you may be in any of these quadrants where you feel like, wow, this is really rigorous work that is helping my scholarly work in my department or in my field. And this is also really doing a great job for our community because it's having the kind of impact that they were hoping to have. There may be other times that you're just getting started and there's some products or materials that you're creating that you're like, you know what, this is really just for the community. This moment, this activity, these few hours is not going to really transform this work kind of in a direct, immediate way. It may inform my work, but the result itself, this artifact, is really about having a high community impact. Likewise, you may, after you've done a lot of community work, say, you know what, I'm going to take some time and just write in this academic journal, and I want to be able to reach that audience. And so I think it helps to show community engaged scholars that you don't have to always be going for absolute community impact and academic impact in every moment and every artifact that you're creating, that in the scope of your relationships, it's helpful to sort of think about where are we spending our attention and our time, and do we need to revisit some of these spaces. And of course, expressions of scholarship have modernized since a lot of promotion and tenure policies and cultures have gotten established. And so when we look at expressions of scholarship, there are many, many more that are even on here and even more that are yet to emerge. And so it's really exciting, but it also means that our CVs start to look really different. I've got a lot of sections because I have things like preprints and monographs as well as exhibits. I have an intellectual property that I have disclosed that's on there. So there's a lot of different things that would go into expressions of scholarship, which make this a little bit harder. So when we're aligning, when we're trying to tell people about what this work is and how it is scholarship, I often talk about, suffering, in Buddhist philosophy, suffering happens when when there's not alignment between what you expect to have happen and what is, right? So that's really where suffering happens. And that's where we really need to help people understand and get on the same view. So with traditional scholarship, these often are about breaking new ground and answering significant questions, having solid theoretical basis, having investigative methods that are appropriate, and getting it to the audiences. So these are a lot of the slide of quality scholarship. When we look at quality community engaged scholarship, we see that there's often this thing, like, yes, that, and we also are connected to broader public issues where it may be a more practical basis, not just theoretical. These are significant questions in the discipline, but also the community. We're disseminating it to academic, but also community audiences. And so as we start to look at these things, we need to be able to think more expansively about this. There are a number of folks who have done some work around promotion and tenure and community engaged scholarship, a lot of disciplinary associations. And so they are helping folks to be able to tell their story about impact and how have they made a difference, because oftentimes that's what we're trying to describe in our P&T dossier and our narratives and the evaluations that we're giving and receiving. And so I just have this one up. Animating Democracy and Imagining America are ones that are focused on arts, humanities, and design. But I also think this continuum of impact is really helpful for folks who are especially in behavioral social sciences, who are thinking about what is it that I want to impact? Is it about what people know? Is it about how people communicate with each other? Is it how people think or feel? So that's often like a humanities kind of feeling, or a type of impact that folks are looking for, but it can also be something that is more interdisciplinary and in things like psychology. For others, they are looking at capacity building and building up the know-how and resources of communities and students. Others are saying, you know, I really want to have an impact on what people do, so behavior. And then others are looking at the lasting conditions and how do we change systems, access, equity, those kinds of things. And so this is one that I just adore because I feel like it really helps me get a sense on what is it that, like, what is my big why? What is my goal here? So so this slide is talking about when you are thinking about your community engaged scholarship, what is it that you're like, I have to do this? Like, this is essential to who I am as a scholar and the scholarship that I do. So for some folks, which I think is helpful to know, is for some people, it's about epistemology. They're like, you know what, like, I can't know what I want to know about this issue if I don't engage the people that are experiencing the issue, if I don't walk alongside and work with these folks as thought partners, as co-creators, as co-laborers. So I just simply can't know if I don't have this approach. For others, it's about translational. They're like, you know what, this work that I'm doing is too urgent, too pressing, too timely, that if we don't work effectively with the community that we're trying to work with. So there may be an epistemological piece, but they're like, I just really want to make sure that we're going from theory to practice and practice to theory type learning loop, so that in my lifetime, in my scholarship, I'm able to quickly improve some sort of issue. For a lot of our community engaged scholar, it's about equity and ethics. So they got into this work because they're like, you know what, I want to be in right relationship with the people who I am working with to understand better and to share this knowledge with other people as a scholar. And so I want to be in right relationship. I want to have equitable processes. I'm interested in ethical engagement. And so for some folks, that's really what drives them, is the sense of doing right and by the community that they're working with. And then for others, there's also folks who come to community engaged scholarship because of who they are. We've done a study where we've interviewed 21 faculty at UNCG who've come to UNCG within 6 years. And what we've learned is that almost all of them talk about community engaged scholarship as part of their identity. And almost all of them many of them talk about their families and how this service or making a difference in their community was how they were raised by their parents or guardians. It was about their faith, or it was about the conditions of the community in which they lived, and they felt like they wanted to become an academic and to make this difference. And many of them said, I came to UNCG because I knew community engagement would be supported. So this is often, looking at this, I think this can be really helpful. This is essential to me because, and it can be all of them. It can be some of them are weighted more heavily. And also you may find that these change over time for you, that some become more resonant. So as we look at, I talked about telling your story at the very beginning. And so one of the ways that I like to think about it is really a narrative tapestry. So if you think about a tapestry, there's like the warp and weft. So the thicker strings that come down, and then the thinner threads or the fabric that you weave through those threads. And so I like that narrative. It's one that my doctoral advisor shared with me when I was going through my program, to think about what are the different kind of main themes in our work that we want to build out, and then how are the different artifacts, activities, experiences helping us to weave together a really beautiful tapestry that's unique to our own work. And so the rest of this presentation is sharing a little bit more about thinking about what are the key components to your narrative tapestry or to your story. So the first is really thinking through what is your aim or your agenda, your vision for your work. The next is to look at who are those people or those stakeholders that you have to work with, And so there may be multiple. So it's not, you may have lots of different partners working on different kinds of projects. You may be developing lots of different artifacts or products through different processes, and then there'll be other folks who are measuring them. So this is a very kind of simple diagram. What I try to do is provide some sentence starters as you're thinking about drafting your narrative about what it is that we aim to do. So that's that vision. We aim to make, higher education more human-centered. Could be one. And this approach is, and then you talk about how you do this approach, and it matters because what are the outcomes that you hope to have seen? You'll talk about things you have produced, and you also want to know about, you want to tell folks about how you know you've been successful. So in nonviolent communication, we often, which is a type of communication that I teach in my class, we talk about, the observations, the needs, the values, the requests, right? So what is it that you are showing people that you are doing? Why does this matter? What's the value? Why is this needed? And then what is it that you want people to know in terms of that success? So I'm going to, let's see if I can, I just stop sharing for one moment. And I need to pull up another document real quick. Okay, so narrative threads. So this document is one that I've created, and I'm happy to share it with you. Also, the PowerPoint I'll be sharing with you is a document that I've created to help people think about writing their narrative threads. And so you can take this with you. You can work with a mentor, a colleague, your department chair or head to work through this a little bit too, or just to share it with them. So some of the challenges in telling your story is that we often feel, I'll just read it. Faculty struggle to tell their stories of their scholarly engagement in a coherent and focused way. Often their scholarship produces effort and artifacts that look different from other forms of scholarship, and often gets categorized as service and not as scholarship. Promotion and tenure reviewers want to know what your aim was and the evidence that you did it with some success, and they want to see focused agendas. So they want to say, okay, tell us how you had a focused agenda rather than like all these smattering of things that just felt chaotic. And then how your efforts align to your scholarship. So how does that align to your agenda? So in promotion, another challenge is that in promotion and tenure, as you are writing this, my experience is that I'm making sense of my own identity, how I see myself, but I'm also doing a lot of image management, how I want others to see me. So that performative piece. And so this is emotionally laborious, and it's also really hard, if not impossible, to do by oneself. So the strategy that I really suggest when you're writing your narrative is don't do it alone. Find someone who cares about you and your work and ask them to share what they have learned from your work, or what parts they are most interested in or curious about. Or ask them to listen to you speak about your work, and then ask them to reflect back to you what they heard as the key aspects in their own words. So this is reflective listening, right? So what I have done especially when I was going up for tenure, the first tenure and promotion for the first time, I went into the faculty mentor who was working with me on my faculty mentor, and I said, I don't know how to talk about myself. And he said, oh, and then he's like, do you want me to share, my thoughts? And I said, yes, please. And I literally sat down on his couch, had my laptop up, and then just let him tell me how he saw me. And so it was really, really helpful because he helped me understand and clarify who my community were, who the folks I really cared about. For me, it was really the faculty community. How do I help create a more human-centered community at UNCG? And how do I help the faculty see community engagement as work that is valued and legitimate in their work? So he really just helped me clarify who my community was. And he also gave me some really nice language. And so I didn't take it full, I didn't take all of it and just transcribe and say, that's me. But it was really helpful to hear him say that. And I also would go on walks with other people, family members, and talk to them about the different things that I was doing. And that was really, really helpful to start to narrow down what it was. As I talk about the different kind of artifacts that I've created, the different projects I've been working on, what I've tried to do also is identify 2 to 3 threads. And so in a moment, I'll show you some examples. And then identify how those themes or those threads make up a whole story or a whole cloth. And so often our roles are integrated. So some things we're teaching, in other ways we're doing research and service, that's okay. They're all part of our story. They're all part of this narrative thread. And then sentence starters. I think they're really helpful just to practice different ways of discovering what is in your own mind. And so for some people, sentence starters are helpful and writing them out. For others, it's talking to somebody. And then for others, it's helpful to be a little more methodical. So I try to provide some different examples. So I do feel like I've talked a little bit about the narrative components. And so rather than showing you these definitions, I'm actually going to go straight down to this is the kind of strategy that I've used with folks that is helpful for me. So on the first line, you would write your overall agenda. So I want to make the university a more human-centered place, could be mine as a community engagement scholar of higher education. And then I might have a theme that is like one of those big threads. And I'm like, okay, I want to work in restorative practices for community engagement scholars. That would be one of my threads. And then I would go through here and I would start to identify who is my, what audience, what stakeholder group do I really want to affect here? And so for me, this might be faculty or it might be community partners. There may be more than one, but I'm going to start to fill this out. Then who are the thought partners and co-laborers who are going to be able to help me do this work? And they could be community members, they could be colleagues, they could be other colleagues at other institutions. So this isn't just community partners, this is for anybody. What are the methodologies or practices that we're using? So it could be that there's surveys, that we're doing observations, that we're doing some liberation pedagogies. Then the next one is around impact goals. What are my goals to that I hope, or what do I hope happens as a result of this, right? So what I hope, what impact do I expect to have from this activity? And then what are the products or artifacts that are developed? So there might be things like an evaluation of that program. There might be the program itself or the curriculum itself or a exhibit. There may be images. There may be poetry or songs. There may be all sorts of products and artifacts. So start just brainstorming those and listing them out. And then finally, this is who is qualified to evaluate the work that I am doing here. And so this is the part where we often assume if there's an academic audience that there is a qualified peer who's going to be that evaluator. When we're doing community engaged scholarship, we also have to be really intentional about telling our evaluators, our department chairs, the people who are looking at us, of what is it, like who is qualified to evaluate or talk about indicators of success and how this has made a difference. And so this is going beyond impact factors or scores, H-index, those kinds of things. This is saying, actually, if I'm trying to affect the culture of a university, I might need to go talk to some people and have them provide some statements or evaluations about whether I did what I said I did. And so you can do that kind of through all three of them. And so I then do have an example of this filled out for this imaginative person whose agenda is to transform the relationship of families and high school so that families and students experience a sense of belonging. And so I just brainstormed what their question might be, like how do principals increase restorative justice practice and participation in high school? That may be one of the areas of work that they're doing. The second one could be that they're establishing new participatory evaluation methods for assessing restorative practices. And the third might be that they're looking at the effects of local and state policy on student and family engagement with schools. And so as you can see in someone's narrative, in their story, some of these threads may be thoroughly community engaged, that they're going to be working with high school administrators and undergraduate students and teachers, and they're doing all this really amazing work that is community engaged. And in other ones, they may say, you know what, I'm just doing policy analysis. It's primary materials. I'm not involving community partners. It's really just me in my office doing this work. That's okay. It's normal. It's expected, but help them understand how what folks want to know is, how does your community engagement, along with other forms of scholarship that you're doing, serve your agenda that you are asking to be evaluated on? And then help me understand how those different products and artifacts were essential, who the collaborators were, why that methodology, those relationships were essential, and what you think was your intended impact. Because if your intended impact is about the community, then how do we know that you had that kind of impact? What would be some ways that we would know that? And so I've shared some other links here, but for now, I think, let me check, I think. I do have references of the materials that I use in this presentation. And then I also have another slide that sort of puts a bunch of these ideas together, so that if you ever wanted to print that out, you can look at that. So I do welcome folks to get in touch with me in case they would like to talk more about their own cases, their own narratives. I really enjoy this kind of work, and my information is here. And of course, you can just find me online. So with that,